Hi guys, today I want to talk to you about the theory of supply. Remember what we talked about for demand, and go see the video if you haven't seen it yet. But we have to remember that when we talk about supply, we're talking about all the range of supply that could be offered between various prices and quantities. Just like what we talked about with demand, there's various segments of supply we can look at. So we can talk about supply being a single supplier. More often though, we talk about all the potential supply in a given market. Keep in mind though, we are talking about one market, so we're not talking about, if we're talking about coffee, we're not talking about suppliers of coffee to San Francisco, as well as suppliers of coffee to Bangladesh, okay? Those would be two different markets unless we're really looking on a big global stage. For our intents and purposes now, we want to focus on something small. So, since I was using coffee for my example with demand, we'll use it again here, but now we've got to put ourselves into the mindset of somebody who is supplying coffee. Again, keep in mind, in my example about demand, I was talking about a cup of coffee I might buy. So again, we need to think about suppliers of cups of coffee. That would be a coffee shop, not necessarily a coffee farmer or a coffee roaster or something like that. Certainly they're still part of the discussion, but most importantly, we're talking about the person selling the finished cup of coffee. Okay, when we examine supply, again, we're talking about price and quantity. And remember, in economics, even though price is on the y-axis, it's the variable that we change. So when price changes, what happens to the quantity that I'm willing to supply? We're going to see a positive relationship. So when the price is 1, I'm only willing to supply a small amount, 20, and when the price is 3, I'm willing to supply a larger amount, 50. This may seem counterintuitive to you. A lot of people struggle with this right here, and they think, well, wait a minute, if it costs less, wouldn't I need to sell more? What you need to remember is the idea of incentives, okay? And a simple question. I need somebody to wash my car for me. I'm willing to pay you $1. Do you want to wash my car for me? I didn't think so. I'm willing to pay you $100. Are you willing to wash my car for me? I bet you are now. So by doing that, again, you in that question were the supplier of a service, the supplier of a washed car. When I raised the price from 1 to 100, you became more willing to supply me with that service. So we've got to not forget these key concepts. As a supplier, you have a scarce amount of things you can do. You can't make everything in the world. You can't make unlimited amounts of coffee as well as unlimited amounts of tea or whatever else a coffee store might sell. You can't do everything, so because you have scarcity, you have to make a choice, and when you choose, you're going to look at your opportunity cost. So, if the price of making coffee doesn't change, and that's something we need to assume is the costs are going to be the same for now, if that's true, well, as the price goes higher and higher and higher, my opportunity cost of not making coffee becomes very high. So a coffee supplier could also maybe make tea. It's an easy example, so let's use that. If I'm making tea, I can't make coffee. So if I can make tea and the price of tea is $1, but the price of coffee is $3, well then I want to make coffee more so, because I would be giving up too much. I would be giving up the $3 simply to get 1. So keep these in mind as you talk about that, and you'll struggle with it, and it's something we'll have to talk about a lot. But for now, all we need to remember is this, and it's that the law of supply is that when price goes up, quantity supplied also goes up. And then likewise, if price were to come down, quantity supplied is also going to go down. Remember, we're always looking at price changing first and seeing the effect on the Q-axis. Okay, just like what we said with demand, there's going to be some other things that are going to affect price. Also, just like what we said with demand, price is the most important. That's why we put it on the axis, and that's why we talk about these being other things. But always remember price is number 1. Okay, production costs. So obviously if I'm making coffee, if I'm selling coffee to consumers and the cost of cups goes up or the cost of the coffee itself goes up, what I have to pay my baristas, any of those things that are my costs, obviously those are going to get passed along to the consumer. So if production costs go up or down, it's going to change my willingness and ability to supply. So let's look at that real quickly. Let's say that the production costs of producing coffee are going to go down. Maybe the price of coffee worldwide of raw coffee beans falls, and I can buy them cheaper now. Well, if we look back at the diagram, let's do a little analysis. If the price was $3 and I was willing to make 20, well, what happens when the price of coffee falls? Well, that makes me more profitable. Therefore, I'm able to make, or willing to make, some new amount, maybe 60. Again, like we said before, we can't ever have a point that isn't on a supply curve. So let's do one more thing. What if I was selling for $1? Well, if I was selling for only $1, I would only be willing to produce 20. So when the price of coffee falls, I'd be willing to produce a little bit more. And again, we'll just bring this over to 30. So what we see then is this must be a new supply curve, and that new supply curve we're going to label as S2. So again, we're going to see this as a shift. We draw an arrow in there to signify that it is shifted. It's a shift of the entire supply curve, and we're saying that all the supply in the whole market has now changed. Other things that can have that effect, price of other products is probably the next biggest. So what if the price of tea goes way, way up? Well, that means I'm less willing to supply coffee because now tea is more profitable, or more profitable than it was. So the price of other products is good. It can also be if the price of related goods. So most people don't buy tea and coffee together, but lots of people buy coffee with donuts. So if the price of donuts goes up, less people will buy donuts, which means probably less people are going to buy coffee as well. Because if they're not going to go buy the donuts, they're also not going to go buy the coffee. Great. Third, technology. This is very strongly linked to production cost. Obviously, whenever technology changes, typically the effect is that I can produce more for less. Future expectations, this is what do I think is going to happen to the price of coffee in the next 5 or 6 months. That may have an effect on what I charge now. The fourth thing that might change supply are government policies, specifically taxes and subsidies. So sales tax and a subsidy to a company, those are also both going to shift the supply curve. Finally, competition. If I'm the only coffee supplier in town, the only coffee store in town, I'm probably going to be able to manipulate price and charge higher prices. But if more and more people come into town to compete with me, then again, my expectation, what I think I'm willing to do, is going to change as well. Keep in mind one last time here, just to close up or to wrap up, that we have to remember that this is trying to show my behavior. So all of this is saying, well, how willing am I to produce coffee at different prices? Maybe I have to, it has to be very expensive for me to want to provide it. And then how able. If you're willing and able, then you can supply it. If you're not willing or if you're not able to supply it at a certain price, so again, if if I have to pay a worker more than $1 to produce a cup of coffee, I can't sell coffee for $1. If I have to pay my worker $1.50, well then the price I sell the coffee for has to be at least more than that. So willingness and ability are two key concepts, and it's really about how the supplier is thinking about what price they will charge.